Hello everyone, it's been a long time since I've made a video. I've been working on another exciting project. I've always been looking for ways to explain this subject of descent management well. Making videos is one way to do that, but I found another interesting way to teach this subject, so more on that later. So for now, this is a video of a flight into Chuli airport in Vietnam. And it's a good example why you can't just always and blindly trust the VDEV. So here we go. So let's see in what situation we are in the descent. Currently at 60 miles to go. Let me just see if that is exact, because we should check when it jumps from to like a rounded number right there. So this is 60 miles. Now normally we do a distance check from 50 miles, but it also works if you're a bit further. It just looks that you're a little bit higher. Okay, so 60 miles times 3, so that's flight level 180. And we're doing 300 knots, so we should fly 3,000 feet lower. So that's flight level 150. And it looks like we're way too high. Now, why would that be? We can check if that's correct. It looks like we're on the VDEV, and maybe the flight plan isn't sequenced. So there's a couple of things you have to check. But for now, it looks like we are way too high. Okay, let's continue the video. Okay, so we are approaching the start of the procedure here. It's a RNF procedure, and okay, so now we change to open descent. And we approaching 50 miles. So we can do like a more accurate check at 50 miles to see how we are doing on profile. So let's skip ahead for that. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so this is 50 miles. 49. I'll just select it exactly. It's a bit further because I can't exactly see the distance here. So let's say this is 50 miles. So 50 times 3, so flight level 150, and still doing 300 knots. So I have to fly 3,000 feet lower. So we should be at flight level 120. Okay, it looks like we're 3,000 feet too high. And it should be correct, this profile calculation we're doing, because it looks like the flight plan is sequenced and there's no other reason why the distance would be wrong. And so it looks like in this case the VDEV is wrong. Now it could also be that there's an altitude constraint, and sure enough there's an altitude constraint there, so that's a clue. But even though there's an altitude constraint there, there's no reason why you can't slow down in order to compensate for being high. So at this moment, we could definitely draw the conclusion that we are way too high on energy. And if you're high on energy, you should apply speed brake. Now you can see that it's indeed done here, but it doesn't last very long. If I skip back a bit, like when we're at 60 miles here, there was a good indication that we're still like quite high. So actually we should already apply speed brake there. If I skip ahead here, then speed brake is applied here, we can see. But then it's shortly after it's reduced again. Okay, now I suspect the first officer did this because he is just looking at the VDEV. Because if I skip back a bit here, like okay, so here we are on the VDEV, then we get it slightly high, and he applies a speed brake, and then later we get slightly low again, and he gets rid of the speed brake. So that to me is an indication that no profile calculation is being done, and instead the FO is just looking at the yo-yo. Okay, now let's skip ahead a bit and see what's going to happen. Okay, you can see me already pointing at some issues here. Okay, let me just go back a bit. So the reason I start pointing at it, because it's adding thrust here, right? So That's another thing. Like if you are in descent mode, it's just gonna fly the yo-yo or VDEV, and depending where the speed is, it might add thrust. So in this case, like here the thrust is at idle, and we're in open descent. Okay. Now then later it goes to alt star, and then we get a further descent clearance. You can see that here. Okay, so we get a further descent clearance. So a new altitude is set in the FCU. And there's a mode reversion to vertical speed. But if we skip ahead a bit further, so he changes to descent mode. Okay, so now we're in descent mode, but we're slightly below the VDEV. It's kind of pitch up to catch that vertical path. And then at this moment, the speed starts to reduce a bit, so the aircraft will add thrust. And as you can see, there goes the power. But that's not what you want, because we're already very high on energy and you don't want to add thrust, because that will make it even worse. So you have to be very mindful of like what mode you are in and how you are on profile. Okay, so let's continue. So now we go back to open descent. That will force the thrust at idle. And the speed brake is back. Okay, but you can see later in the flight that the speed brake is sometimes reduced and get rid of and then applied again, which is clear that the first officer is not quite aware of the energy situation. Okay, so let's see what's gonna happen now. So we're gonna skip ahead a bit further. Let me just go back a bit to do this altitude check at 40 miles. Okay, so 40 times 3, so flight level 120. Now we're doing 300 knots. So we should be at 9,000 feet with this speed. Now you can see that we're way too high still. Of course we are way too high because we were at 60 miles way too high and with almost no speed brake. At 50 miles you'll be just still very high, and if there's still no speed brake, then at 40 miles you will also be very high. That's just the way the physics works. Okay, so now let's see where the actual problem comes from. Like, why is it that the VDEV is so much off, so wrong? Okay, the reason is this. In the database, there's a altitude restriction here at Tasson of at or above flight level 100. Now, the reason for that is terrain. Okay. Now, there's I'm not sure if it's a bug or a feature from Airbus, but for some reason, the FMS, if the restriction is above flight level 100, then if you are high on profile, or I should say like if the waypoint is like higher than like a regular normal altitude, if it forces you high, then if that restriction is above flight level 100, then the FMS does not reduce the speed automatically. If the restriction is puts you high, but it is actually somewhat lower, like below flight of 100, then the FMS will automatically reduce speed to compensate for that. But if it's higher like this, for some reason it does not do that. Now again, I'm not sure if that's intentional by Airbus or it's just an oversight, but regardless, you should always be aware of that. So if you see that there's an altitude restriction which is quite high, you should calculate the total distance and then see at what speed you should be at in order to make sure that you're not high on energy. And if you look at the FMS here, then I'm not sure if you can see that. Let me skip it back a bit. You can see that at Tasson, it wants to be at 250 knots. Now, if you do the math, it's not going to work. If you look at the chart or the FMS, you add all these distances up and you see what the total track miles is, you will see that you're way too fast or way too high on energy when you are at Tasson here. So you have to manually put a different speed in here. Now, what speed should we be at Tasson if we would have prepared it a bit better? Okay. So at Tasson, we are at flight level 100. The amount of track miles to go is 33 miles. So let's do some calculation. First, we do 30 miles. So 30 times 3, so that's 9,000 feet. Now, we know already that this speed doesn't work. So let's take green dot speed as a reference. Okay, so 9,000 feet. And if with green dot speed, we should be at 1,000 feet lower. So at and we should be at 8,000 feet there, but we cannot do that either. So regardless, you have to add some flaps to slow down even more. Oh, actually, I do the calculation wrong. It's not 30 miles, it's 33 miles. Okay, so 30 times 3, 9,000, plus 3 miles is 1,000 feet. So we should be at 10,000 feet. Okay, yeah, but that's for a 3-degree path that does not take the speed into account. So at 10,000 feet, if you are at green dot speed, you should be 1,000 feet lower. So you should be at 9,000 feet. So at this point, with green dot speed, we should be at 9,000 feet. Well, you can't do that either because of the altitude constraint. So you could do flap 2, but then flying so long with flap 2 is a lot of drag, and that's not really necessary. If you would be at S speed here, then you would be 500 feet too high if you do the math. So, and that's okay, because 500 feet too high, that's okay anyway. But especially with so much track miles to go, that's no problem. You can add some speed brake, and that will fix that problem. So before, we should have set the speed restriction of S speed here, and then added flap 1, selected flap 1 as we approached. Okay, so we are indeed very high here. Okay, let's see what's going to happen further. Now you can see here that we're starting to fly quite a bit above the vertical path, so the yo-yo is all the way on the bottom. And what's going to happen next, it's important to check the FMA and how that relates to the speed and the power. Okay, so now we're gonna pass transition here, and the next altitude is set in descent mode. We're not sure if we cleared for the approach here yet, but anyway, we're cleared to descend to 5,000 feet, and in descent mode that's fine, because although here there's an altitude restriction of 9,000, that's fine in descent mode. Now, okay, now some speed brake is applied again. That's good, and approach phase activated. You can see that there. So the aircraft is starting to reduce. Is that necessary? Well, normally you would start to reduce from 250 knots down to green note at about 5,000 feet. So that's what's happening here is not correct either. It's not, in a way, it's not wrong to slow down earlier, but it just makes it slower. And also, you will get a little bit high if you reduce speed too soon. And since we are high already, we don't really want to do that. Okay, so now watch what's happening. So we're in descent mode. We are above the yo-yo, or the VDEV in this case. It automatically engages there. So now it's gonna set the speed back higher. Okay, if you are above the VDEV and you set the speed back higher, it is indeed gonna pitch down to catch that. But what is important though, like as soon as it catches the VDEV, you have to put the speed back below the current speed again, because otherwise it will add thrust, and that's exactly what happens here, as you can see. So now, at the moment, the thrust is still at idle, and here it's gonna capture the vertical path. There you go. So at this moment, the aircraft sees that it's on the vertical path, but the speed back is higher than the current speed. So it will add thrust, and that's exactly what happens, as you can see here. There the thrust goes, right? And I point that out, so the first officer changes to open descent, and that will force the thrust at idle. Okay, so there's the thrust at idle again. Okay, so now if you do the math, we are still high on energy. In fact, you could argue that there's no need to do a profile calculation here, because we were way too high before. So by definition, if you don't apply speed brake, you'll be still way too high here. But anyway, let's do a calculation. So at 25 miles, so we round down to 20 miles, so 20 times 3, so that's 6,000 feet. We're doing 250 knots, so we should be 2,000 feet lower. So we should be at 4,000 feet, and then we add 5 miles is 1,500 feet, so 5,500 feet. So we're still 2,000 feet too high. You see how this yo-yo or VDEV is can be very misleading. We are 2,000 feet too high, yet it indicates that we're actually low here. So you always have to do your own profile calculation. The VDEV is just a clue. It may or may not be correct. Maybe the VDEV is correct and you are wrong with your profile calculation, and that could be because of an altitude constraint. And sometimes it's the other way around. So the VDEV is actually correct. So, okay, let's continue. So, okay, so now the speed brake is applied again. Good. So now it goes into Alt star because of this altitude constraint here. And make sure if it goes into Alt star, you have to make sure that the thrust remains at idle. Okay, so the speed buck is reduced here, so that's good. We'll keep the thrust at idle. Okay, so now it's an Alt. And you can see on the right side here goes the thrust again. Why? Because the trend arrow hits the speed buck and it's flying level. So again, you don't want that. Speed brake is applied. I can see why the FO doesn't want to reduce the speed because of VLS. Okay. But either way, you don't want thrust. So then you will just have to get rid of the speed brake and then reduce the speed buck further. Either that, or since we're quite light, you can also just select flap and that will get rid of VLS also. Okay, so there was a bit of thrust added here. So we're already high on energy and it adds thrust, so it makes it even worse. But now the flap 1 is selected. Okay, good. So that will get rid of VLS, so we can keep the speed brake. You can still keep speed brake if you fly level, if you're high on energy. That's a good way to do that. Okay, so now the speed buck is reduced. The thrust is at idle again. There's a bit of a indication here of the speed brake, but that was because the thrust was on before, just before that. If you go back here, here's the thrust with the speed brake. So then it will flash the speed brake here, the message, even though actually the thrust is already reducing to idle. So that's only temporary, okay? Okay, so now we've passed the restriction and we changed to open descent, okay? And so here the speed buck is increased again because we are high on energy. Yeah, you could do that. It will not make that much difference actually if you're this close to the airfield. Okay, so now we are approaching 5,000 feet. Let's see what happens. It goes into Alt star and flap 2 is selected. Yeah, that's okay. This will give you extra drag. I would wait a bit with that though, but okay, that's fine. You can do that also here. So we're now in open descent, flap 2 selected, and the speed is set also selected. That's good because if you manage the speed here in open descent, it will put the aircraft even higher. So it's good that the speed buck is selected here. Now the approach mode is armed. You have to make sure that you do that when the final descent point is the active waypoint, and you can see that there's 2 times a 3-degree path here on this waypoint. So indeed, with this database, this waypoint here is the final descent point. Okay, so the approach phase is activated, and now it engages already in final app. We didn't even turn final yet, but okay, that's okay here. Now, the one thing you also have to you have to realize is that in the final app, it's a bit the same as in glide slope mode, that it will just pitch for the VDEV. Like if you are not in final app, if you will reduce the speed, it will pitch up and will just fly higher, but it won't do that in final app. In final app, it will just pitch down and fly the VDEV, and it doesn't care about the speed. So now the speed buck, it just controls the thrust. So here it will add power because the speed buck is above the current speed, and now it will add power. Just like it will do the same if it would be on the glide slope. And you can see that here. So here goes the thrust again. Now at this time, if you do the math, we're actually not that high on energy anymore. So, but okay, so here we turn final, and Let's see what's happening now. Yeah, so now we're back on energy on profile. Now we're not high on energy anymore, and we go down to the fly the approach quite nicely. If I skip ahead a bit more, then you can see that that we are stable at 1,000 feet. So that's it. Hope you learned something from it, and see you next time. If you like this video, please consider buying my book, Practical Descent Energy Management. It has a lot of examples, a lot of pictures, and it will be very useful for your line training, line preparation, or even if you're already experienced, to improve your descent profile performance. I have also another book, Practical Airline Radio Telephony, and this is more for the beginners. All the ins and outs of radio telephony, again with a lot of examples. All my books are also available on Amazon Kindle, so you can have it as a digital copy. Thank you.